7 members spanning 3 generations died within a single month of mysterious ailments that baffled every physician from Louisville to Cincinnati. Their symptoms were identical: severe skin irritation that progressed to open sores, followed by fever, delirium, and death. What made this tragedy even more disturbing was that each victim had been wearing newly tailored garments, sewn by the same pair of hands. The local authorities buried the case along with the bodies, but recently discovered letters from the period reveal a truth so sinister that it was deliberately hidden from history. The seamstress responsible was a house slave named Dina, and her method of revenge was as ingenious as it was deadly. Before we continue with the story of Dina and the Coldwell plantation, if you're fascinated by these dark chapters of American history that were buried and forgotten, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell.
At IHG's Holiday Inn Express, you can guest how you guest. Enjoy free breakfast while you work or play. Take on Miami.
Notification bell. Also, let us know in the comments what state you're listening from. We love connecting with viewers who share our passion for uncovering these hidden mysteries. What happened on that Kentucky plantation would forever change how we understand the quiet resistance that occurred within the walls of the antebellum South, where desperation and intelligence combined to create the most chilling forms of justice. The Coldwell plantation sprawled across 2,300 acres of Kentucky's finest bluegrass country, just 17 miles southeast of Lexington. In 1854, it stood as one of Fayette County's most prosperous estates, its rolling fields heavy with tobacco that would fetch premium prices at the Louisville markets. The main house, a towering Georgian colonial with 6 white columns and wraparound verandas, commanded views of the entire operation like a fortress overlooking conquered territory. Samuel Coldwell had inherited this empire from his father in 1839 and spent the following 15 years transforming it into one of Kentucky's most profitable agricultural enterprises. Beyond the tobacco fields, he maintained extensive hemp operations that supplied rope and bagging to plantations throughout the Mississippi Valley, a lumber mill that processed timber from his own forests, and a distillery that produced bourbon whiskey sold as far north as Chicago and as far south as New Orleans. By the spring of 1854, Samuel owned 57 enslaved human beings, making him one of the largest slaveholders in central Kentucky. He was a methodical, calculating man who approached slavery as he did any other business investment, with careful attention to maximizing returns while minimizing costs. His neighbors respected his business acumen and sought his advice on managing their own operations, while his enslaved workforce learned to fear his cold, systematic cruelty. Samuel's wife, Margaret Henley Coldwell, came from Virginia tobacco royalty. Her father had owned plantations in 3 counties and had raised his daughter to view enslaved people as sophisticated machinery that required proper maintenance and occasional harsh discipline. Operations of the Coldwell household with the same iron control her husband exercised over the fields. The Coldwell family circle in 1854 included Samuel's widowed mother, Constance, a 74-year-old woman whose mind remained sharp despite her frail body. Constance had lived through Kentucky's transformation from frontier wilderness to plantation society, and she maintained traditional ideas about the absolute authority of white families over their human property. Her influence over household management remained strong, and she took particular interest in overseeing the training and discipline of house slaves. Samuel and Margaret's 3 children represented the future of Kentucky's slaveholding class. Thomas, 22 years old and recently graduated from Transylvania University in Lexington, had spent 2 years studying law and politics with the intention of representing Kentucky's interests in the expanding national debate over slavery. His political ambitions were matched by a cruel streak that made him particularly harsh in his treatment of the plantation's enslaved workforce. Mary Elizabeth, 20 years old and considered one of the county's most eligible young women, was engaged to Jonathan Pemberton, heir to a neighboring plantation that bordered the Kentucky River. Her wedding, planned for June 1854, was anticipated to be one of the social events of the season, cementing an alliance between two of the region's most powerful families. The youngest child, Samuel Jr. I was 17 years old and already showing signs of the calculating intelligence that characterized the Coldwell men. He spent his days learning every aspect of plantation management, from crop rotation and soil chemistry to the psychological techniques necessary to maintain control over large numbers of enslaved people. Margaret's unmarried sister, Catherine Henley, had joined the household 2 years earlier following their father's death in Virginia. At 28, Catherine had rejected several marriage proposals to maintain her independence, but her presence in the Coldwell household allowed her to exercise authority over enslaved people without the responsibilities of managing her own estate. Her treatment of house slaves was notoriously cruel, even by the standards of Kentucky Plantation Society. This family's wealth and social position depended entirely on the labor of their 57 enslaved human beings, who worked from dawn to dusk, maintaining the various operations that generated the Coldwells' substantial income. Among the house slaves, none was more skilled or more valuable than a 29-year-old woman known simply as Dina. Dina possessed talents that made her indispensable to the Coldwell women and the envy of neighboring plantation families. She could sew with precision that rivaled the finest seamstresses in Lexington, create intricate embroidery that decorated the family's formal wear, and design clothing that showcased the latest fashions from Paris and New York. Her understanding of fabrics, colors, and construction techniques was so sophisticated that visiting ladies often remarked that the Coldwell family's clothing rivaled anything they had seen in Charleston or Richmond. Born on the plantation in 1825, Dina had been trained from childhood by her mother, Ruth, who had served as head seamstress for the previous generation of Coldwells. Ruth had recognized her daughter's exceptional intelligence and had secretly taught her to read and write, skills that were illegal for enslaved people in Kentucky, but which made Dina even more valuable to her owners. Dina could read fashion magazines, follow complex patterns, and even write detailed notes about measurements and fitting adjustments. What the Coldwell family never suspected was that Dina's literacy extended far beyond fashion and sewing. She had access to the family's library and had spent years studying books on chemistry, botany, and medicine, always careful to return volumes to their exact positions to avoid detection. Her intelligence and curiosity had led her to develop an encyclopedic knowledge of plant chemistry that would have impressed university-trained scientists. Dina's position in the household hierarchy was complex and precarious. While her skills made her valuable, her intelligence made her dangerous in the eyes of her owners. She had learned to present herself as competent but not threatening, skilled but not educated, loyal but not independent. This performance had protected her for years, but it also created a psychological burden that grew heavier as she witnessed the casual cruelty that defined daily life on the plantation. The winter of 1853-1854 had been particularly harsh, both in terms of weather and the family's treatment of their enslaved workforce. A series of poor tobacco harvests had made Samuel Coldwell increasingly desperate to maintain his lifestyle and social status, leading to longer work hours, reduced food rations, and harsher punishments for any perceived failures.
Yeah, the crypto world is definitely shaky for sure.
She was the Louis Vuitton and
pull out your
she was
as soon as possible.
sewing poison in the clothes.
Failures. The house slaves, who were visible to the family every day, bore the brunt of their frustrations. Dina found herself working 18-hour days to meet the family's demands for new clothing, household linens, and elaborate decorations for social events. She was required to maintain the wardrobes of 7 adults, each with specific preferences and requirements that changed with every season and social occasion. The physical exhaustion was compounded by emotional torment as she watched her fellow enslaved people suffer under increasingly brutal conditions. The breaking point came in February 1854, when Samuel Coldwell announced his intention to sell Dina's 14-year-old daughter, Sarah, to settle a gambling debt that Thomas had incurred during his college years. Sarah was one of only 3 children who had survived from Dinah's 5 pregnancies, and the prospect of losing her daughter to unknown buyers in the Deep South drove Dinah beyond the limits of endurance. It was during the sleepless nights that followed this announcement that Dinah began to formulate her plan for revenge. She would use the very skills that made her valuable to destroy the family that had destroyed so many lives. Her needlework would become her weapon, and her intimate knowledge of each family member's clothing preferences would provide the perfect method of delivery. The first phase of Dinah's revenge began in early March 1854, disguised as her most devoted service to the Coldwell family. Margaret had commissioned an entirely new spring wardrobe to showcase the family's prosperity during the upcoming social season, including day dresses, evening gowns, riding habits, and accessories that would demonstrate their status among Kentucky's plantation elite. Dinah approached this commission with apparent enthusiasm, working late into the night by candlelight to create garments that would exceed Margaret's expectations. She selected the finest fabrics from bolts that Samuel had imported from Charleston and New York, choosing silk taffeta, cotton lawn, and delicate Brussels lace that would complement Margaret's fair complexion and showcase her figure to advantage. What no one could have suspected was that Dinah had spent the previous months developing methods of transforming beautiful clothing into instruments of death. Her extensive reading had taught her about plant toxins and their effects on human skin, while her sewing expertise allowed her to develop application techniques that would make her weapons virtually undetectable. The key to her method lay in her preparation of sewing thread. Working in the hours before dawn, when the plantation slept and she had privacy in the sewing room, Dinah would soak specific threads in solutions she had prepared from various toxic plants that grew wild on the plantation's extensive acreage.
Hold on.
Pokeweed roots gathered.
So she would make the tea and soak the clothes in the tea? God damn it, Dinah. Dinah, won't you blow your horn? Okay?
During the previous autumn and dried to concentrate their toxins, formed the base of her most potent preparations. She combined these with oils extracted from poison sumac, concentrates made from Jimson weed seeds, and essences drawn from toxic mushrooms that flourished in the damp corners of the tobacco barns. Dinah's scientific approach to her preparations showed the depth of her intelligence and education. She tested different concentrations on small fabric samples, timing how long the toxins remained active and studying their effects when applied to different materials. She experimented with methods of binding the poisons to thread and fabric, ensuring they would remain potent for weeks while remaining invisible to casual inspection. Her method of application was ingeniously simple. When constructing garments for family members, Dinah would use her treated threads only in specific locations: necklines, cuffs, waistbands, and seams that would come into direct contact with skin. She calculated the concentrations carefully, using just enough poison to create the desired effects, while avoiding amounts that would cause immediate symptoms that might expose her methods. Margaret's new emerald silk dress became the first test of Dinah's refined technique. The gown was a masterpiece of 1850s fashion, with a fitted bodice that showcased Margaret's figure, elaborate pleating that required hundreds of precise stitches, and bishop sleeves gathered with delicate precision. But the threads used to construct the neckline, cuffs, and waist seam had been soaked in a combination of pokeweed extract and poison sumac oil, concentrated through multiple applications and drying cycles. On March 12th, Margaret wore the dress to a ladies' luncheon at the home of Judge Harrison Beaumont, one of Lexington's most prominent citizens. The gathering included the wives and daughters of Fayette County's most influential families, providing Margaret with the perfect opportunity to display her new wardrobe and the skills of her seamstress. The dress drew numerous compliments and even requests from other ladies asking if Dinah might be available for commission work. Margaret spent 4 hours at the luncheon, during which time the toxic threads remained in constant contact with her skin, slowly releasing their poisonous compounds into her system.
The woman who
The
burned
first
14
symptoms appeared that
plantation
evening
owners. Oh my
as
God.
Margaret prepared for bed. She complained of unusual itching along her neckline and wrists, areas where the dress had made the most direct contact with her skin. She attributed the discomfort to the new fabric, or perhaps an allergic reaction to the starch that Dina used to achieve such crisp results in the dress's construction. By the following morning, the itching had intensified and was accompanied by visible redness and swelling. Margaret summoned Dr. Harrison Beaumont, Judge Beaumont's younger brother and one of Lexington's most respected physicians. Dr. Beaumont examined the affected areas and found them puzzling, but not immediately alarming, prescribing a salve made from chamomile and advising Margaret to avoid wearing the dress until her skin healed. What Dr. Beaumont couldn't have known was that he was observing the early stages of systematic poisoning designed by someone with sophisticated understanding of toxicology and human physiology. The plant compounds that Dina had used were designed to create progressive skin damage that would worsen over time, eventually leading to systemic poisoning as the toxins were absorbed through the damaged skin barrier. Margaret's condition worsened over the following days, despite Dr. Beaumont's treatments. The initial redness and swelling developed into painful blisters that wept clear fluid, and the affected areas began to expand beyond the original sites of contact. More concerning was Margaret's developing fever and the appearance of similar lesions in areas where the dress had not made direct contact, suggesting that the toxins were spreading through her system. While Margaret suffered through her mysterious illness, Dina continued her normal routines with the calm efficiency that the Coldwell family had always valued. She expressed appropriate concern for Margaret's condition, even offering to prepare special cotton garments that would be gentler against irritated skin. Her apparent devotion to the family's welfare made it impossible for anyone to suspect that she was the source of Margaret's agony.
If you have SNAP or Medicaid, you may qualify for a free iPhone or Samsung, plus up to 10 gigabytes of data.
Margaret's agony. During Margaret's illness, other family members continued to commission new clothing from Dina, providing her with opportunities to expand her campaign of revenge. Samuel Jr. requested new riding clothes for a hunting expedition with neighboring plantation owners, giving Dina the chance to prepare a jacket and trousers using threads treated with even more concentrated toxins than she had used for Margaret's dress. Thomas commissioned formal wear for a political rally in Frankfurt, where he planned to speak in support of pro-slavery candidates running for state office. His new morning coat, vest, and trousers were constructed with Dina's most potent preparations, designed to create maximum suffering while maintaining the appearance of perfectly normal clothing. Mary Elizabeth, despite witnessing her stepmother's mysterious illness, continued planning for her June wedding and requested that Dina create her wedding dress and trousseau. The wedding gown became Dina's most ambitious project.
Yo! A killer wedding dress! I'm so stupid. Oh my God.
Requiring hundreds of yards of treated thread applied with mathematical precision to ensure that the toxic effects would be both severe and immediate. By early April, 3 members of the Coldwell family were suffering from the same mysterious symptoms that had afflicted Margaret. Dr. Beaumont found himself facing a medical crisis that challenged everything he thought he understood about disease and contagion. The symptoms were consistent across all victims. Severe dermatitis followed by systemic poisoning, but they showed no signs of being contagious and seemed to affect only the Coldwell family members while sparing everyone else in the household. Dr. Beaumont's confusion was compounded by the selective nature of the affliction. While the Coldwell family grew progressively sicker, the house slaves who cared for them, washed their clothing, and handled their personal belongings remained perfectly healthy. This contradicted every theory about contagious disease that he had studied during his medical training. The mystery deepened when Dr. Beaumont began to notice that each victim's illness had begun shortly after wearing newly made clothing. The correlation was too consistent to be coincidental, but he couldn't understand how fabric could cause such severe and systematic poisoning. His examination of the affected garments revealed nothing unusual. They appeared to be perfectly normal examples of fine needlework, constructed from high-quality materials with exceptional skill and attention to detail. What Dr. Beaumont couldn't detect with the scientific methods available in 1854 was that Dina had created a delivery system for plant toxins that was virtually invisible to contemporary investigation techniques. Her method of binding poisons to thread and fabric left no obvious traces, and the organic compound she used would not have been detectable without sophisticated chemical analysis that wouldn't be available for decades. As April progressed, the Coldwell family's ordeal intensified. Margaret's condition had stabilized but left her permanently scarred and weakened. Samuel Jr. His reaction to his treated riding clothes was so severe that he remained bedridden for weeks, his torso covered with painful lesions that refused to heal. Thomas, who had worn his formal attire for an entire day at the Frankfurt political rally, collapsed during his speech and was rushed to a hospital in the state capital with symptoms so severe that witnesses initially believed he had been attacked with acid. The news of Thomas's collapse reached the plantation on April 15th, carried by a messenger who also brought word that the young man was not expected to survive. Samuel Coldwell's reaction was immediate and explosive. He was convinced that his family was under systematic attack by enemies who sought to destroy Kentucky's pro-slavery political leadership. Samuel's paranoia led him to hire private investigators from Louisville to examine his business affairs and political relationships, looking for anyone who might have reason to harm his family. These men spent weeks interviewing neighbors, business associates, and political contacts, but found no evidence of external threats. They examined the family's food, water supply, and household goods, testing everything they could think of for signs of poison. The investigators' focus on external enemies provided perfect cover for Dina's continuing operations. She observed their efforts with calm interest, understanding that their failure to identify any outside source of danger would eventually lead to more intensive examination of the plantation's internal operations. But she also knew that her reputation for loyalty and competence would protect her from immediate suspicion, at least until the investigators exhausted other possibilities. During this period of investigation and mounting paranoia, Dina made her most audacious move. She began preparing garments for the family members who had not yet fallen victim to her toxic needlework: elderly Constance, Catherine, and Samuel himself. These final pieces would incorporate everything she had learned about dosages, timing, and application methods from her earlier experiments. The psychological pressure of maintaining her performance as a loyal house slave while systematically murdering the family she served was taking its toll on Dina's mental state. She began to show signs of the strain, subtle changes in her behavior that might have alerted a more observant owner, but which went unnoticed by the self-absorbed and increasingly paranoid Coldwell family. But Dina's campaign of revenge was about to enter its most dangerous phase, as the investigators' failure to identify external enemies would soon force them to turn their attention inward, toward the very people who served the Coldwell family with apparent devotion and loyalty. As April melted into May, Dr. Beaumont's growing desperation led him to correspond with medical colleagues across the country, searching for any documented cases that might explain the Coldwell family's mysterious affliction. His letters, preserved in the archives of the American Medical Association, reveal a physician at the limits of his knowledge, grasping for explanations that seem to exist beyond the boundaries of established medical science. Dr. Marcus Webb, from the University of Louisville Medical School, arrived at the plantation on April 28th, bringing with him primitive toxicology equipment and a more systematic approach to investigating the family's condition. Dr. Webb's examination of tissue samples and clothing fragments marked the first scientific attempt to identify the specific agents responsible for the poisonings, though the limitations of 1854 analytical chemistry meant that his conclusions would remain incomplete. Dr. Webb's preliminary findings confirmed what Dr. Beaumont had suspected. The family was being systematically poisoned by plant-based toxins applied through their clothing, He detected traces of organic compounds in fabric samples that were clearly toxic, but lacked the scientific knowledge and equipment necessary to identify specific plants or understand the sophisticated preparation methods that made Dina's poisons so effective. The presence of scientific investigators created a new level of tension throughout the plantation. The enslaved population understood that they were all under suspicion, and that any discovery of wrongdoing by one of their members would result in collective punishment that could include mass executions or sales to brutal Deep South plantations. Samuel Coldwell's paranoia had evolved from external enemies to a growing suspicion that the threat came from within his own household. The systematic nature of the poisonings and their specific targeting of family members while sparing everyone else suggested intimate knowledge of the victim's habits and routines. More importantly, the method of delivery required access to the family's clothing over extended periods, pointing toward someone with legitimate reasons to handle their personal belongings. Sheriff Benjamin Hargrove of Fayette County arrived at the plantation on May the 2nd, accompanied by federal marshals who had been investigating similar cases of suspected poisoning in neighboring counties. Their presence transformed the plantation from a scene of medical mystery into a criminal investigation that would ultimately expose the most sophisticated murder plot in Kentucky's antebellum history. Sheriff Hargrove's initial approach focused on the external enemies that Samuel Coldwell continued to insist were responsible for his family's suffering. But Deputy James Fletcher, who had more experience with criminal investigations, began to notice inconsistencies that pointed toward an inside source. The selective nature of the poisoning, the intimate knowledge of each victim's clothing preferences, and the sophisticated understanding of toxic plants all suggested someone with long-term access to the household and extensive knowledge of local flora. During this period of increasing scrutiny, Dina maintained her performance as the devoted house slave with remarkable composure. She continued her normal routines, expressing appropriate concern for the family's welfare, while secretly monitoring the investigators' progress and preparing for the possibility that her methods might be discovered. But the strain of her double life was beginning to show in subtle ways that would have been invisible to white observers, but were noticed by other enslaved people on the plantation. Solomon Wright, an elderly slave who worked in the plantation's medicinal herb garden, had begun to suspect that Dina's recent interest in plant chemistry was connected to the family's mysterious illnesses. Solomon was 73 years old and had been enslaved on the Coldwell plantation for over 40 years. His knowledge of traditional plant medicine made him valuable for treating minor ailments among the enslaved population, and his advanced age had earned him a degree of respect that allowed him to move freely around the plantation grounds. More importantly, his understanding of toxic plants and their effects gave him insights that the white investigators lacked. Solomon had noticed that Dina had been gathering specific plants and herbs throughout the previous year, always under the pretense of helping with dyeing fabrics or preparing traditional remedies for the slave quarters. He observed the timing of her activities and began to see correlations with the family's illnesses that seemed too consistent to be coincidental. The moral dilemma that Solomon faced reflected the broader complexities of slave resistance in the antebellum South. While he had no love for the Coldwell family, who had treated him and his fellow enslaved people with consistent cruelty for decades, he also understood that discovery of Dina's activities would bring catastrophic consequences for the entire slave community. Kentucky in 1854 was a state where even suspected slave revolts resulted in mass executions and brutal crackdowns that could affect enslaved people for hundreds of miles around the original incident. Solomon knew that white authorities would not distinguish between guilty and innocent members of the enslaved population if they suspected a coordinated uprising or systematic poisoning campaign. Solomon's knowledge placed him in an impossible position. He could remain silent and risk being complicit in additional murders, or he could reveal what he suspected and guarantee brutal retaliation against innocent people who had no knowledge of Dina's activities. His internal struggle represented the psychological torture that the slavery system inflicted on its victims, forcing them to make impossible choices between competing moral imperatives. Meanwhile, Dina was implementing the final phase of her campaign with methodical precision. She had prepared garments for the 3 family members who had not yet fallen victim to her toxic needlework, and had hidden these items in locations where they would be discovered and worn without arousing suspicion. For elderly Constance, Dina had prepared a new morning dress with sleeves and collar, treated with a slower-acting but more potent combination of toxins. She understood that Constance's advanced age would make her more susceptible to the systemic effects of the poison, so she had developed a preparation designed to create maximum suffering over an extended period. Samuel Coldwell received a new vest that incorporated Dina's most lethal preparations, designed to ensure his death within days of wearing the garment. The vest was constructed with particular attention to areas that would make direct contact with skin, using threads that had been soaked multiple times in concentrated toxins to maximize their effectiveness. Catherine's new corset represented Dina's most personal revenge. Catherine's cruel supervision of house slaves had made her a particular target of Dina's hatred, and the corset was designed to create maximum visible damage to her skin, ensuring that her suffering would be obvious to everyone who saw her. These final preparations required Dina to take increasingly dangerous risks to access the family's personal quarters and clothing storage areas. She used her knowledge of the household's routines and her status as head seamstress to move freely through areas that were normally off-limits to enslaved people, always maintaining the appearance of someone conducting legitimate business. The psychological transformation that had occurred in Dina during her months of planning and execution was becoming more apparent to observers who knew her well. Her fellow enslaved people noticed changes in her demeanor, a calmness that seemed almost supernatural, combined with a distant quality that suggested she had moved beyond normal human concerns about consequences and survival. Ruth, Dina's mother and the former head seamstress, recognized the signs of someone who had accepted that death was inevitable and had found peace in that acceptance. Ruth had seen similar changes in other enslaved people who had reached the limits of their endurance and had chosen to resist regardless of consequences. She understood that her daughter had moved beyond the possibility of turning back and was committed to completing her mission even at the cost of her own life. The mounting tension on the plantation reached a breaking point on May 8th, when Mary Elizabeth suffered a severe relapse after wearing what appeared to be one of her existing dresses. Dr. Webb's immediate examination revealed that this garment had also been treated with plant toxins, proving that the poisoner was still active and had ongoing access to the family's belongings. This discovery led Sheriff Hargrove to order an immediate lockdown of the plantation. No one could leave the property, and all enslaved individuals would be subjected to intensive questioning and searches. The investigators began examining every piece of clothing in the main house, looking for evidence of tampering or toxic substances. The comprehensive search of the main house revealed the sophisticated nature of Dina's operation and the extent of her planning. Hidden garments treated with toxins were found in wardrobes, linen closets, and storage areas throughout the house. The investigators realized that they were dealing not with a simple poisoning case, but with a systematic campaign of murder that had been planned and executed over many months. Dr. Webb's analysis of the treated garments revealed the use of at least 7 different toxic plants, combined in ways that created synergistic effects that multiplied their individual potencies. The sophistication of the preparations suggested knowledge that rivaled formerly trained chemists of the era, combined with innovations that demonstrated genuine scientific creativity. But even as the net closed around her, Dina had prepared one final revelation that would shock even the experienced investigators and ensure that her story would become one of the most disturbing chapters in Kentucky's antebellum history. The systematic search of the Coldwell mansion on May 9th revealed the true scope of Dina's operation and the sophisticated intelligence behind her campaign of revenge. In wardrobes, linen closets, and storage areas throughout the house, investigators found garments that had been treated with toxic preparations and strategically placed where they would eventually be worn by their intended victims. Dr. Webb's examination of these hidden garments provided the first clear evidence of the scientific sophistication behind the poisonings. Each piece of clothing showed different preparation methods and toxin concentrations, suggesting that Dina had been conducting systematic experiments to perfect her techniques. Her notes, discovered hidden beneath loose floorboards in her quarters, revealed an understanding of chemistry and botany that impressed even university-trained scientists. Sheriff Hargrove's interrogation of the enslaved population initially focused on identifying co-conspirators or anyone else with knowledge of Dina's activities. The questioning was conducted with the brutal efficiency that characterized law enforcement in slaveholding states, using intimidation and threats to extract information from people who had no legal rights or protections.
This is our first ever home collection, designed with Etsy sellers. If you don't know about Tanner Fletcher, we really like to incorporate home and wardrobe together, and it's something we've been dreaming of since we started the brand. We wanted to create things that...
Protections. Most of the enslaved people on the plantation genuinely had no knowledge of Dina's activities. Her ability to maintain complete secrecy about her preparations while continuing to perform her normal duties demonstrated the psychological compartmentalization skills that she had developed during years of surviving under the slavery system. But Solomon Wright's knowledge of Dina's plant-gathering activities and his understanding of toxic botany made him a crucial witness whose testimony would ultimately expose the full extent of her operations. His decision to reveal what he knew came only after he was convinced that Dina would be executed regardless of his testimony, and that his silence might result in additional deaths among the surviving family members. Solomon's testimony revealed that Dina had been preparing for her campaign of revenge for over a year, methodically gathering toxic plants during their peak seasons and developing increasingly sophisticated methods of concentrating and preserving their poisonous properties. He described her systematic approach to testing different combinations of toxins, always under the pretense of experimenting with fabric dyes or traditional medicines. More disturbing was Solomon's revelation that Dina had discussed her plans with him in general terms, though he had not initially understood that she was describing actual murder plots rather than theoretical revenge fantasies. She had spoken about using her sewing skills to repay the Coldwell family for their cruelties, and had asked detailed questions about plant toxins and their effects on human skin. Dr. Webb's analysis of Dina's preparation methods revealed innovations that were decades ahead of contemporary scientific understanding. She had developed techniques for binding plant toxins to fabric fibers that made her poisons virtually undetectable while maintaining their effectiveness for extended periods. Her understanding of absorption rates and toxicological pathways showed knowledge that would have been remarkable even in someone with formal medical training. The discovery of Dina's detailed notes provided investigators with insights into the psychological motivations behind her campaign. Her writings revealed not just personal hatred for the Coldwell family, but a sophisticated understanding of the broader political implications of her actions. She believed that the mysterious and terrifying nature of the family's deaths would create fear and uncertainty among other slaveholders throughout Kentucky and neighboring states. Dina's political thinking showed remarkable sophistication for someone who was officially denied any form of education. She understood that individual acts of resistance, no matter how personally satisfying, rarely created lasting change in the slavery system. But a mysterious mass poisoning that appeared to target an entire slaveholding family might generate the kind of fear and paranoia that could lead to systematic changes in how enslaved people were treated. Her notes also revealed the personal tragedies that had driven her beyond the limits of endurance. The sale of her younger brother, the threatened sale of her daughter, and years of witnessing brutal treatment of her fellow enslaved people had created a reservoir of rage that she had channeled into her methodical campaign of murder. The psychological profile that emerged from these documents painted a picture of someone who had undergone a fundamental transformation from victim to predator, using intelligence and skills that had been developed under oppression to create weapons that her oppressors could never have imagined. Her ability to maintain the performance of loyal servitude while systematically murdering the family she served demonstrated psychological compartmentalization skills that impressed even experienced criminal investigators. Sheriff Hargrove's formal arrest of Dina on May 10th was conducted with unusual caution, reflecting both respect for her intelligence and fear of potential co-conspirators among the enslaved population. Her composure during the arrest procedure unnerved even experienced law enforcement officials who expected either desperate denial or emotional breakdown from someone facing certain execution. Dina's behavior during her initial interrogation confirmed investigators' assessment of her exceptional intelligence and psychological strength. She answered questions with calm precision, neither admitting guilt nor denying the evidence that had been assembled against her. Her responses revealed extensive knowledge of legal procedures and constitutional protections, though as an enslaved person she was entitled to none of these safeguards. More unsettling was Dina's apparent satisfaction with the results of her campaign. When informed that 3 family members had already died from her poisoned garments, she showed no remorse or emotional reaction. Her only concern seemed to be whether the remaining family members would suffer the fate she had planned for them. The interrogation revealed that Dina had calculated her campaign with mathematical precision, timing each phase to ensure maximum psychological impact on the surviving family members. She had wanted them to experience the terror of watching their loved ones die mysteriously while knowing that they might be next, creating the same kind of helpless fear that enslaved people lived with every day. Dr. Webb's continued analysis of the toxic preparations revealed that Dina had created enough concentrated poison to treat dozens of additional garments. Her notes indicated that she had prepared for the possibility of discovery and execution by creating stockpiles of treated materials that could continue to kill family members for months after her death. This revelation led to an intensive search of the entire plantation for hidden caches of toxic materials and treated garments. The search revealed the extent of Dina's planning and her understanding of the psychological warfare she was conducting against her owners. She had hidden prepared materials in locations throughout the plantation, ensuring that her campaign of revenge would continue, even if she were discovered and executed. The investigation also revealed that Dina had been preparing for different possible scenarios based on how quickly her activities were discovered. She had created contingency plans that would maximize the death toll regardless of when her operations were exposed, showing strategic thinking that impressed even her captors. But the most disturbing discovery was yet to come. Evidence that Dina's campaign was part of a broader pattern of sophisticated resistance that had been occurring throughout Kentucky's slaveholding region, suggesting that her methods might not have been unique and that other enslaved people might have been conducting similar operations without detection. The discovery of additional toxic materials hidden throughout the plantation on May 11th transformed what had appeared to be an isolated case of individual revenge into something far more sinister and systematic. Sheriff Hargrove's expanded search revealed caches of prepared plant materials, treated threads, and partially completed garments hidden in barn lofts, root cellars, and abandoned slave cabins scattered across the Coldwell property.
Have you played with the snow yet, Sunshine? Like, have you rolled it up in your hands and thrown a ball of snow? No.
Cabins scattered across the Coldwell property. Dr. Webb's analysis of these materials showed that Dina had been preparing for a campaign of murder that would have extended far beyond the immediate Coldwell family. Among the discovered items were garments in various stages of completion that were sized for children, suggesting that she had planned to target the next generation of slaveholders as well as their parents. More disturbing was the discovery of correspondence between Dina and enslaved people on neighboring plantations. These letters, written in a coded language that disguised their true meaning, suggested that knowledge of toxic plant preparation methods was being shared among literate enslaved people throughout the region. The implications of this discovery sent waves of panic through Kentucky's slaveholding community. Federal marshals from Louisville and Frankfurt arrived at the plantation on May 12th to investigate the possibility of a coordinated slave rebellion using poisoned clothing as a weapon. Their presence brought national attention to the case and elevated it from a local criminal matter to a potential threat to the stability of the entire slaveholding system. The federal investigation revealed that similar mysterious deaths among slaveholding families had been reported in counties throughout Kentucky and southern Ohio over the previous 2 years. In each case, the victims had suffered from identical symptoms, severe skin reactions, followed by systemic poisoning and death. And each case had involved recently made clothing sewn by skilled enslaved seamstresses. The pattern was unmistakable to investigators who now understood what to look for, but it had remained invisible to local authorities who lacked the broader perspective necessary to connect isolated incidents across multiple counties. The realization that Dina's methods might have been used by other enslaved people created panic among Kentucky's plantation owners and led to emergency sessions of the state legislature to address what appeared to be an organized campaign of resistance. Marshal William Henderson from Louisville took personal charge of the expanded investigation, bringing with him a team of federal agents who had experience with conspiracy cases in other slaveholding states. Their systematic approach to documenting the evidence revealed the sophisticated nature of the resistance network that had developed among literate enslaved people throughout the region. The interrogation of Dina became more intensive as investigators sought to identify other participants in what they now believed was a coordinated campaign. But Dina's responses revealed both her intelligence and her commitment to protecting others who might have been involved in similar activities. She neither confirmed nor denied the existence of a broader network, maintaining a careful balance that revealed nothing useful to her interrogators while avoiding outright lies that might have resulted in additional torture. Dr. Webb's analysis of the correspondence found among Dina's belongings revealed a coded communication system that allowed enslaved people to share information about toxic plants and preparation methods without explicitly discussing their intended uses. The letters appeared to be innocent discussions of traditional medicine and fabric dyeing, but closer examination revealed detailed instructions for creating the same types of concentrated poisons that Dina had used against the Coldwell family. The sophistication of this communication system impressed even the federal investigators, who recognized that they were dealing with an intelligence network that rivaled anything they had encountered in their previous investigations of organized resistance. The fact that enslaved people, who were legally forbidden from learning to read and write, had developed such an effective system for sharing dangerous knowledge demonstrated the limitations of white control over black communities. Sheriff Hargrove's questioning of enslaved people on neighboring plantations revealed that knowledge of Dina's activities had spread throughout the local slave community, creating both admiration and fear among people who understood the inevitable consequences of her discovery. Some enslaved people expressed support for her actions, while others worried that her campaign would bring brutal retaliation against innocent members of their community. The psychological impact of the discovery extended beyond the enslaved population to affect white families throughout central Kentucky. The realization that their most trusted house slaves might possess the knowledge and motivation to kill them through their clothing created a level of paranoia that fundamentally altered relationships between slaveholders and their human property. Plantation families began examining their clothing for signs of tampering, dismissing enslaved seamstresses who had served them for years, and importing finished garments from northern manufacturers to avoid relying on slave labor for their most intimate possessions. The trust that had allowed the slavery system to function efficiently was replaced by suspicion and fear that made normal plantation operations increasingly difficult. Margaret Coldwell, despite her weakened condition from her initial poisoning, demanded to be present during Dina's interrogations. Her insistence on confronting the woman who had nearly killed her revealed both her desire for revenge and her need to understand how someone she had trusted could have harbored such deadly intentions for so many months. The confrontation between Margaret and Dina on May 13th provided one of the most dramatic moments in the entire investigation. Margaret's accusations and demands for explanations were met with Dina's calm responses that revealed both her intelligence and her complete lack of remorse for the suffering she had caused. When Margaret demanded to know how Dina could have betrayed the family that had provided for her and trusted her with their most personal possessions, Dina's response cut to the heart of the moral contradictions inherent in the slavery system. She pointed out that the Coldwells had never provided for her. They had simply allowed her to survive in exchange for her labor, which they owned as completely as they owned any other piece of property. Dina's explanation of her motivations revealed the depth of psychological trauma that years of enslavement had created, but also demonstrated the intellectual sophistication that had allowed her to channel her anger into such a methodical campaign of revenge. She described watching family members sold away, enduring years of casual cruelty, and facing the prospect of losing her remaining daughter to settle her owner's gambling debts. More chilling was Dina's calm explanation of how she had used the Coldwell family's vanity and social pretensions against them. She had understood that their obsession with fashion and social status would make them eager to wear the beautiful garments she created, never suspecting that their pride would become the instrument of their destruction. The psychological profile that emerged from these interrogations painted a picture of someone who had undergone a fundamental transformation from victim to predator, using skills developed under oppression to create weapons that her oppressors could never have anticipated. Her ability to maintain perfect composure while describing her systematic murder campaign demonstrated psychological strength that impressed even her captors. As investigators worked to uncover the full extent of the conspiracy, news of Thomas Coldwell's death in Frankfurt reached the plantation on May 14th. His collapse during the political rally had been followed by days of agony as the concentrated toxins in his formal wear created systemic poisoning that no medical intervention could reverse. The news of Thomas's death seemed to provide Dina with a sense of completion rather than satisfaction.
At IHG's Holiday Inn Express,
so I'm
you can take
listening
on
to
Miami,
how
Mexico City, or Minneapolis.
slaves killed their masters.
Satisfaction. Her notes indicated that she had viewed him as the most crucial target in her campaign, not just because of his personal cruelty, but because of his political ambitions to expand slavery into new territories. His death at a pro-slavery political rally sent a message that extended far beyond the Coldwell plantation. Dr. Webb's final analysis of Dina's toxic preparations revealed innovations that were decades ahead of contemporary scientific understanding. She had developed methods of concentrating and stabilizing plant toxins that wouldn't be matched by university-trained chemists until the 1870s. Her techniques for binding poisons to fabric fibers showed creativity and intelligence that challenged assumptions about the intellectual capabilities of enslaved people. But even as the investigation revealed the full scope of her accomplishments, Dina faced the inevitable consequences of her actions. Kentucky law provided only one punishment for enslaved people who murdered their owners: death by hanging, usually preceded by torture designed to extract information about co-conspirators and to serve as an example to other potentially rebellious slaves. The date for Dina's execution was set for May 20th. Giving investigators less than a week to extract any additional information about the broader conspiracy they believed she had been part of. But Dina's psychological preparation for death had been as thorough as her preparation for murder, and she showed no signs of being willing to provide information that might implicate others in her activities. As her execution approached, Dina made one final request that would provide the most chilling revelation yet about the scope of her planning and the depth of her commitment to revenge against the family that had destroyed so many lives. Just when we thought we'd seen the full extent of this horror in Kentucky, the investigation intensifies. If this story is giving you chills, share this video with a friend who loves dark mysteries. Hit that like button to support our content. And don't forget to subscribe to never miss stories like this. Let's discover together what Dina's final revelation would expose about the true scope of her deadly campaign. On the morning of May 18th, 2 days before her scheduled execution, Dina made a request that stunned even the hardened investigators who had been interrogating her for over a week. She asked to be allowed to examine the bodies of the Coldwell family members who had died from her poisoned garments, claiming that she possessed information about additional victims that could only be confirmed through direct observation of the corpses. Marshal Henderson initially dismissed this request as a desperate attempt to delay her execution, but Dr. Webb convinced him that Dina's scientific knowledge of the toxin she had used might provide valuable information for preventing similar crimes in the future. The decision to grant her request would lead to the most shocking revelation in an already unprecedented case. The examination took place in the Coldwell family crypt, a stone building on the plantation grounds where the bodies of Thomas, Mary Elizabeth, and Samuel Jr. lay awaiting burial in the family cemetery. Dina's behavior during this macabre proceeding was as calm and methodical as her approach to murder had been, examining each corpse with the dispassionate attention of a medical researcher studying the results of an experiment. What she revealed during this examination exceeded the investigators' worst fears about the scope of her campaign. The distinctive patterns of skin damage and tissue necrosis on each body told a story that only she could read. A story of systematic experimentation with different toxic preparations, carefully calibrated to produce specific effects and maximum suffering. Thomas's body showed the results of her most concentrated preparations, designed to cause rapid systemic failure that would ensure his death, even if he received immediate medical attention. Mary Elizabeth's corpse revealed evidence of toxins specifically chosen to target reproductive organs, ensuring that she would never bear children who could inherit the Coldwell plantation.
Oh, shit.
Samuel Jr., his remains showed signs of preparations designed to cause maximum psychological torment through prolonged suffering before death. But Dina's most chilling revelation concerned the bodies that were not present in the crypt. She informed the horrified investigators that her campaign had extended beyond the immediate Coldwell family to include other individuals who had been involved in the sale and abuse of enslaved people on the plantation.
Oh, shit.
Judge Harrison Beaumont, Dr. Beaumont's older brother and the man who had presided over legal proceedings that had separated enslaved families, had received a new judicial robe as a gift from the Coldwell family 3 months earlier. The robe had been sewn by Dina using threads soaked in slow-acting toxins designed to create gradual poisoning that would be attributed to natural causes. The judge had indeed been suffering from mysterious symptoms that had been attributed to his advanced age, but Dina's description of the specific toxins she had used matched his condition perfectly. A messenger was immediately sent to Lexington to examine Judge Beaumont, but arrived to find that he had died 2 days earlier from what his physician had diagnosed as heart failure. Jonathan Pemberton, Mary Elizabeth's fiancé and heir to the neighboring plantation that bordered the Kentucky River, had also received gifts of clothing from the Coldwell family during his courtship of their daughter. Dina revealed that she had treated several items in his wardrobe with preparations designed to cause sterility and eventual death, ensuring that the alliance between the two plantation families would never produce the next generation of slaveholders. The investigation of Jonathan Pemberton revealed that he had been experiencing symptoms similar to the Coldwell family members, but had attributed them to stress from his fiancée's illness and death. Dr. Webb's examination of his clothing confirmed the presence of the same plant toxins that had killed the Coldwells, though in concentrations designed to work more slowly and less obviously. Most disturbing was Dina's revelation that she had prepared treated garments for prominent pro-slavery politicians and businessmen who had visited the Coldwell plantation during political gatherings and social events. Her access to these individuals through her reputation as an exceptional seamstress had allowed her to target people far beyond her immediate owners, creating a campaign of political assassination disguised as mysterious illness. The scope of her planning became clear as investigators realized that she had been using the Coldwell family's social connections and her own reputation to gain access to Kentucky's entire pro-slavery political establishment. Her method of gifting beautiful garments to influential visitors had allowed her to spread her toxic preparations throughout the region's leadership class. Dr. Webb's analysis of Dina's preparation methods revealed that she had developed different formulations for different intended effects. Some were designed to kill quickly and obviously, creating fear and panic among slaveholding families. Others were intended to cause gradual decline that would be attributed to natural causes, allowing her to eliminate targets without revealing the systematic nature of her campaign. Her notes indicated that she had been working toward what she called the final phase of her operation, a coordinated attack on multiple targets that would have created chaos throughout Kentucky's slaveholding society. The timing had been planned to coincide with the 1854 congressional elections, when the deaths of prominent pro-slavery politicians would have maximum impact on the national debate over slavery expansion. The political sophistication of this planning revealed that Dina's motivations extended far beyond personal revenge to encompass a strategic attempt to disrupt the political and social systems that maintained slavery throughout the region. Her understanding of the connections between individual slaveholders and broader political movements showed intelligence and education that challenged every assumption about the intellectual capabilities of enslaved people. Sheriff Hargrove's investigation of other plantation families throughout central Kentucky revealed that Dina's campaign had indeed extended far beyond the Coldwell property. Mysterious deaths and illnesses among prominent slaveholding families over the previous year showed patterns that were consistent with her methods, suggesting that her network of resistance had been more extensive and effective than anyone had realized. The discovery of additional victims created panic throughout Kentucky's plantation society and led to emergency measures by state and federal authorities. Governor Lazarus Powell declared martial law in 5 counties and authorized military units to conduct systematic searches of plantation properties for evidence of organized slave resistance. Federal investigators were dispatched to examine similar cases in neighboring states, revealing a pattern of mysterious deaths among slaveholding families that suggested Dina's methods had been shared throughout the broader network of literate enslaved people. The realization that sophisticated resistance operations had been conducted under the noses of white authorities for years created a crisis of confidence in the security systems that maintained slavery. But even as the full scope of her accomplishments was revealed, Dina showed no signs of satisfaction or regret. Her psychological preparation for death had been as thorough as her preparation for murder, and she faced her impending execution with the same calm determination that had characterized her entire campaign. On the evening of May 19th, the night before her scheduled execution, Dina made one final statement that provided the most chilling insight yet into the mind behind one of the most sophisticated murder campaigns in American history. Her words would haunt investigators and plantation families throughout the region for years to come, serving as a reminder that the violence inherent in the slavery system inevitably bred violence in return. Dina's execution on May 20th, 1854, was conducted before a crowd of over 200 plantation owners, government officials, and curious spectators who had traveled from across Kentucky to witness the end of what newspapers called the most diabolical slave conspiracy in American history. But even her death would not end the terror that her campaign had unleashed throughout the region's slaveholding society. Her final statement from the gallows, delivered with the same calm intelligence that had characterized her entire campaign, provided a chilling assessment of the moral contradictions inherent in the slavery system, and a warning that her methods would inspire others to similar actions. She spoke not of personal revenge, but of justice for the countless enslaved people who had suffered and died under the plantation system that her victims had helped to maintain and expand. "You have taught us that human beings can be property," she said, addressing the crowd of plantation owners who had come to watch her die. "You have shown us that families can be separated for profit, that children can be sold like livestock, that human suffering is acceptable when it serves white interests. I have simply used your own lessons to teach you what it feels like to be powerless in the face of systematic cruelty." Her words were recorded by newspaper reporters and government officials, creating a document that would be suppressed for decades, but would eventually emerge as one of the most articulate statements of slave resistance philosophy ever recorded.
Ever.
The intelligence and moral clarity she demonstrated even in her final moments challenged assumptions about enslaved people that were fundamental to justifying the slavery system. The investigation that followed Dina's execution revealed the full scope of her network and its impact on slaveholding society throughout the region. Dr. Webb's analysis of similar cases in neighboring counties confirmed that at least 12 prominent slaveholding families had lost members to what appeared to be coordinated poisoning campaigns using methods identical to Dina's. Federal authorities identified over 30 cases of mysterious deaths among pro-slavery politicians, judges, and plantation owners that showed patterns consistent with toxic plant preparations applied through clothing. The sophistication and coordination of these attacks suggested a level of organization and intelligence among enslaved resistance networks that challenged every assumption about white control over black communities. The psychological impact of these discoveries extended far beyond the immediate victims to affect the entire social structure of slaveholding society. The realization that trusted house slaves might possess both the knowledge and motivation to kill their owners through intimate contact with clothing created a level of paranoia that made normal plantation operations increasingly difficult. Plantation families throughout Kentucky and neighboring states began dismissing enslaved seamstresses who had served them for years, importing finished clothing from northern manufacturers, and implementing new security measures that fundamentally altered the relationships between slaveholders and their human property. The trust that had allowed the slavery system to function efficiently was replaced by suspicion and fear that made the system less profitable and more psychologically burdensome for white families. Solomon Wright, the elderly enslaved man whose testimony had helped expose Dina's methods, lived for 3 more years before dying of natural causes in 1857. His role in the investigation had made him a controversial figure among the enslaved population, with some viewing him as a traitor who had betrayed a heroic resistance fighter, while others saw him as someone who had tried to prevent additional suffering among innocent members of their community. The moral complexity of Solomon's position reflected the impossible choices that the slavery system forced upon its victims. His knowledge of Dina's activities had placed him in a situation where any action he took would result in suffering for people he cared about, illustrating the psychological torture that slavery inflicted on entire communities. The surviving members of the Coldwell family never fully recovered from their ordeal. Samuel Coldwell, though he had not worn any of Dina's poisoned garments, was so traumatized by the systematic murder of his family that he sold the plantation in 1856 and moved to California, abandoning Kentucky's plantation society entirely. Margaret Coldwell lived until 1859, but remained an invalid. Her skin permanently scarred from the toxins in her emerald dress, and her psychological state fragile from the knowledge that someone she had trusted had been planning her death for months. Her sister Catherine survived her exposure to Dina's preparations, but suffered permanent damage that left her unable to function independently. Constance Coldwell, the elderly family matriarch, died in her sleep 2 weeks after Dina's execution, though whether from natural causes or from delayed effects of toxic exposure was never determined. Her death marked the effective end of the Coldwell family's role in Kentucky's plantation society and served as a symbol of how Dina's campaign had achieved its goal of destroying an entire slaveholding dynasty. The plantation itself was eventually divided and sold to multiple buyers, with the main house abandoned and left to decay. Local residents reported that no family would live in the building where so many mysterious deaths had occurred, and the property gained a reputation that kept it empty for decades. Dr. Webb's scientific analysis of Dina's methods contributed to advances in toxicology that wouldn't have occurred for years without her innovations. His documentation of her plant preparation techniques provided insights that were used to develop both medical treatments for poisoning victims and security measures to detect similar attacks in the future. The correspondence network that investigators discovered among literate enslaved people was never fully mapped, but evidence suggests that knowledge of Dina's methods spread throughout slave communities across multiple states. Similar cases of mysterious deaths among slaveholding families continued to be reported for years after her execution, though none were as systematic or well documented as her campaign. The political impact of Dina's actions extended beyond individual victims to influence the broader national debate over slavery. The revelation that enslaved people could organize sophisticated resistance operations challenged arguments about their supposed intellectual inferiority, while the terror her campaign created among slaveholding families demonstrated the inherent instability of a system based on the systematic oppression of intelligent human beings. Historians who have studied the case in recent years have noted that Dina's campaign represented one of the most sophisticated forms of resistance in the history of American slavery. Her ability to use her position as a trusted house slave to conduct systematic murder over an extended period demonstrated possibilities for resistance that slaveholders had never imagined and that challenged fundamental assumptions about the security of the plantation system. The suppression of records related to her case for over a century reflected the continuing discomfort that American society felt about confronting the realities of slave resistance and the moral contradictions of the slavery system. Only with the civil rights movement of the 1960s did historians begin to examine cases like Dina's as examples of intelligent resistance rather than simple criminal behavior. Today, the site of the former Coldwell plantation is marked only by stone foundations and the family cemetery where the victims of Dina's campaign were eventually buried. Local historians have noted that the case represents one of the most compelling examples of how enslaved people used intelligence, patience, and intimate knowledge of their owners' habits to resist the system that oppressed them. The story of Dina and the Coldwell family serves as a reminder that the violence inherent in the slavery system inevitably produced violence in return, and that the intelligence and humanity of enslaved people could never be completely suppressed no matter how systematic the attempts to dehumanize them. This mystery shows us that the most dangerous resistance often comes not from open rebellion, but from the quiet determination of individuals who use their intimate knowledge of their oppressors to turn the symbols of that oppression into instruments of justice. What do you think of this story? Do you believe everything was revealed about Dina's network and methods?
Nope.
Leave your comment below with your thoughts about this chilling chapter of American history.
Yo, this shit
if you enjoyed this tale...
Yo, this shit go crazy. Like, it could have been in their shoes. It could have been in everywhere. What's up, King? Like, they was sewing shit into their
What if vengeance didn't come with a knife, but with a needle? What if death arrived not in battle, but in the softness of cotton, the silence of a seam? In 1853 Tennessee, a wealthy family began to die, slowly, mysteriously. Their clothes, perfectly sewn, hid something far more sinister. But who was Louisa, the enslaved woman behind the needle? And why did no one see her coming? If you want to follow real stories that defy time and reveal hidden truths, subscribe to the channel now and turn on notifications so you don't miss any of our investigations. The humid Tennessee air of midsummer 1853 clings to the thin cotton dresses hanging out to dry in the yard. In the distance, the white-pillared plantation house looms, its windows reflecting the midday sun with cold indifference. Under its roof, a family moves through familiar routines. Help at midday, the mistress with her quiet sip of tea, the master glancing from beneath his brimmed hat. Around them,
Hollywood is a place where are sacrificed.
Glancing from beneath his brimmed hat. Around them, shadows gather, shadows they cannot name, cannot see, cannot escape. In the back building, rows of wooden benches hold the enslaved women, hands busy at needle and thread, eyes lowered, backs bent under the weight of expectation. Amid them is Louisa. She is slender, graceful in the way she sits. Her fingers move with mechanical precision, guiding fine stitches through linen and silk. Her face is expressionless, yet her eyes, dark pools, reflect more than submission. They hold memory, they hold sorrow, they hold resolve. Louisa's task is intimate. She hems the mistress's gowns, mends tears in the master's vest, embroiders newborn christening gowns, repairs the children's jackets. Each garment passes through her hands, and each stitch is set with care. The family members wear clothes that bear her labor, unaware of the silent calculus behind each thread. It begins quietly, a faint rash on the mistress's wrist, dismissed as heat or insect bite. The children complain of chills, then aches that linger despite rest. The master grows irritable, his eyes clouded with a dull confusion. The family physician is summoned, a punctual man with handwritten ledger notes. He examines the symptoms: nausea, dizziness, skin inflammation, neurological tremors. He prescribes herbal tonics and rest in shaded rooms. He blames the summer fever sweeping through the region, the humidity, or perhaps tainted spring water. No suspicion falls on Louisa. Her hands retreat, resume stitching. Her lips never part. Around day 20, the first death comes. The youngest daughter, pale and still in her bed. No tears announced it, only the hush. Then the matriarch, her hair falling in thin wisps, her skin blistered, her breath slows. The physician grows uneasy. His hypothesis shifts from fever to poison. He orders the clothes sealed away, draws samples of fabric for examination. He notes residues, strange oily spots between folds, subtle discoloration of linings, but chemical analysis is rudimentary, inconclusive. There are no forensic labs, only intuition against rumor. The mistress, gasping in delirium, whispers faintly of weightlessness, of fire beneath her skin. The master's appetite vanishes. His unsettled eyes scan servants with equal parts fear and curiosity.
I'll be back, yeah.
Louisa continues, seated at her bench. An external observer sees nothing unusual in her stillness. But rumor slithers through the household. Linens that burn flesh, odors like bitter almonds, hushed warnings. Do not wear that satin blouse. The seamstress's quarters are overlooked. No chain binds her to suspicion. She exists within another realm, the space between visibility and invisibility. Her work is her voice. Her silence is her power. Once the children lie in quiet coffins, once the widow's mourning falls heavy across the halls, whispers emerge. Did the seamstress slip something in the thread? Could the poison have been infused through accidental carbuncles, hidden stitches, or the tuberous oils she might crush and thread beneath linings? No one saw her prepare anything strange, but every corpse wore her patchwork, her monograms, her lace. Rumors grow in hush. The seamstress was taught by an elder woman. Tales of herbal lore learned in whispered sermons of resistance, names of plants that kill when pressed to cloth, dosed subtly, slowly over time. No one outside the quarters confirms it. Louisa does not speak. She is described as quiet, obedient, efficient. Books do not hold her name. Yet every frayed seam, every mend, binds the suspicion tighter. In that still heat, the household retreats into fear. Guests are turned away. Sleep comes fitfully, and Louisa stitches on. The house stood still, but it was not peaceful. The air inside grew heavy, layered with unspoken fear and sickness. Servants moved like ghosts, careful not to disturb the silence. The White family withdrew into their rooms. The halls that once rang with forced laughter now echoed with footsteps and coughs. Behind the closed doors, linen sheets were soaked in sweat, and strange lesions appeared on the skin of those who wore the fine garments sewn by Louisa. But the true story began long before the bodies failed. Louisa's past was a patchwork of wounds and whispers. She was born into bondage in North Carolina and sold south at the age of 14. The sale was precipitated by a disciplinary incident, a vague term in the ledger of her previous owner. There were rumors, never confirmed, that a boy who hurt her met an untimely death, convulsing in the fields before he could scream. When Louisa arrived in Tennessee, she was quiet, composed. She showed immediate skill with cloth, and it was that talent that spared her from the fields. She was moved to the seamstress quarters, under the direct supervision of the house mistress. What no one knew, what no one wanted to know, was that Louisa carried with her more than a needle. In her first years on the new plantation, she formed a quiet bond with one of the older women, a midwife named Bet. Betta was slow-moving, with cataracts over her eyes, but she remembered the names of plants that made men bleed inside. She spoke of the old ways, of roots and saps that carried death in slow trickles. Betta had seen her own children sold off. Her hands trembled when she passed these teachings to Louisa, not from fear, but from age. Under the guise of collecting herbs for dyes and washing, Louisa learned to find the sources of subtle poisons. The White family never questioned her comings and goings. She gathered jimsonweed seeds, dried belladonna berries, scraped resin from wild hemlock. Each had its own language. Alone, they were dangerous. Combined in exact quantities, infused in fabric linings, they whispered death through the pores of the skin. No one suspected the seamstress. Her role was too mundane, too feminine, too domestic to inspire fear. She stitched in silence. She obeyed. But with each garment she repaired, a decision was made. A thread here, a hidden fold there, a lining slightly heavier than it needed to be. She worked slowly. Time was on her side. Death did not need to come suddenly. In fact, it was better if it did not. By midsummer, a strange pattern emerged. Servants who touched the family's clothing too often began to show signs of illness. A maid collapsed after wearing a hand-me-down shawl. A stable boy developed ulcers after being instructed to carry a load of freshly laundered coats. The plantation doctor began to suspect environmental toxins, perhaps mold or stagnant water in the old well. But nothing made sense. The symptoms were erratic, some swift, others delayed. The White family dismissed his worries, calling them superstitions. Within the enslaved quarters, whispers traveled differently. They spoke of Louisa's hands as blessed or cursed. Some feared her, kept their distance. Others left small offerings at the threshold of her room. Thread, beads, roots, not gifts, acknowledgments. They knew, or they guessed, but no one spoke openly. The family's decline grew more apparent. Their youngest son, once robust, lost weight rapidly. The master of the house began to hallucinate, screaming at shadows, accusing his own children of betrayal. The mistress kept to her bed, eyes glazed, her breath ragged. Rumors of witchcraft spread beyond the plantation.
Not witchcraft.
We're looking for adults 45 and under to be in our HPV vaccination ad.
The house is
Sound
cursed.
like you? Not me. In a relationship. Think you're sexually active.
Her bed, eyes glazed, her breath ragged. Rumors of witchcraft spread beyond the plantation. A traveling preacher was called. He found nothing but sorrow and rot. And Louisa, calm, her fingers always busy. One night, the house cook claimed she saw Louisa speaking to someone who was not there, a shadow by the trees, perhaps Bet's ghost. But when questioned, Louisa only lowered her eyes and resumed her sewing. Her silence was unbroken. The plantation, once proud and thriving, now bore the scent of decay, and in the heart of it, Louisa sewed, as always, each stitch a quiet act of defiance, each hemline a veil between vengeance and invisibility. By late August, the plantation house no longer echoed with the sounds of piano music or idle chatter from the parlor. What remained was the slow, stifled breath of a home suffocating in its own silence. The family's decline had ceased to be a mystery. It had become a certainty. One by one, the members of the household were succumbing to a sickness no doctor could name, no prayer could repel, no servant could ignore. The master of the house, once a pillar of control and cruelty, now wandered the corridors in confusion. His skin had yellowed, eyes sunken and ringed with red. He muttered names under his breath, some living, some long dead, and flinched at the touch of his own clothes. His shirts, laundered and pressed, seemed to itch violently against his flesh. He ripped one off mid-meal, collapsing into a fit of spasms in front of two stunned guests who had ridden in from Alabama. They would not stay the night. His wife, bedridden for weeks, had ceased to recognize her surroundings. Her skin had developed small eruptions that oozed pus and blood when she moved. The house's new physician, brought in by the overseer, suggested arsenic poisoning, though he admitted that it made no sense for it to manifest through the skin. He recommended removing all fabric from the sleeping quarters and initiated fumigations. Yet nothing changed. The children, what remained of them, stayed mostly in their rooms. Their joints ached, their gums bled. The family's eldest son, once poised to inherit the estate, refused to leave his bed altogether. When he did, he was incoherent, stammering visions of insects beneath his skin and fire behind his eyes. He clawed at his neck until it bled. A nursemaid who attempted to calm him was struck across the face. She left the same night. The staff moved differently now. Their eyes avoided the family. They communicated in glances. Among themselves, they knew something was wrong, something more than fever or illness. Some began refusing to handle the garments. The laundry room, once bustling, was nearly deserted. A few workers were punished for abandoning their posts, but others simply fell ill, their hands covered in strange lesions that refused to heal. Those who touched the clothes too often never seemed to recover. Louisa, however, remained untouched. She neither coughed nor ached. Her skin was clear. She kept to her corner, sewing steadily. Her movements were unchanged. She responded to orders, nodded when spoken to, delivered finished garments with precision and calm. But something in her silence had begun to weigh heavier. One of the housemaids, Sarah, confided to another that Louisa had asked for a specific plant from the woods, something not used in dyes. Sarah had brought it to her months earlier. She didn't know why. A bitter-smelling root. At the time, she thought nothing of it. Now, she wondered aloud, had it been part of this? Was Louisa using something unnatural? Late one evening, the overseer's daughter was found unconscious on the floor of the parlor. Her skin was flushed, her breath ragged. She had worn a shawl that had just been repaired by Louisa's hand. The overseer, a hard man with a history of cruelty, stormed through the house and tore apart Louisa's quarters. But he found nothing, just spools of thread, needles, folded fabric, nothing that could be held up as evidence. Louisa stood silently, arms at her sides, her expression unreadable. The following morning, he demanded that she be confined, but the master, barely conscious, murmured a refusal. "She's done nothing, nothing," he repeated, eyes glassy. The house was unraveling, and its master was too far gone to act. That night, a fire broke out in the far shed. It was quickly contained, but the fear had spread. Some believed the land was cursed. Others whispered of spirits, of voodoo, of a silent rebellion being carried out, not with blades or fire, but with thread and cloth. And Louisa still stitched, her hands calm, her eyes steady. No one dared stop her. The plantation had become a place of absences. Windows once flung open to invite breezes now stayed shuttered against imagined threats. Footsteps no longer echoed through the wide halls of the manor, only the occasional shuffle, the hesitant creak of floorboards, and the persistent cough of someone wasting away behind a closed door. It was the arrival of Dr. Albert Greaves, a physician from Charleston with a reputation for treating illnesses the local men feared, that brought a new sense of tension to the household. He was a man of science, of logic, and yet as he moved through the estate, he felt an unease he could not name. His examination began methodically, studying the afflicted, collecting samples, documenting symptoms, but it was the clothing that drew his attention. Every garment worn by the sick showed signs of discoloration along the linings, stitching that appeared slightly stiff, as if something oily had been worked into the thread. A faint, bitter odor clung to the fabric, sharp and unfamiliar. Greaves began to isolate the garments. He requested that none of the household wear clothes prepared by the seamstress until further notice. He spoke to the overseer, then to the house staff. Quietly, he asked questions about the woman in the sewing room. Louisa. How long had she worked here? Had anyone seen her mix anything into her work? No one answered directly. Eyes turned away. But the silence itself spoke volumes. The pressure mounted. Whispers became accusations. The overseer, still smarting from his daughter's collapse, demanded Louisa be brought forward. She stood in the center of the parlor beneath the oil lamp's flicker, surrounded by sickened eyes and trembling voices. They asked her questions. Did she handle strange substances? Did she poison the fabrics? Who taught her the things she knew? Louisa answered none of it. She looked past them, past their fear, past their sickness. The master, too weak to rise from his bed, sent word that no action be taken without proof. But proof was a luxury none could find. Greaves collected a sample of the fabric and attempted crude